In 1805, two of history's greatest naval empires met off the coast of Spain, and history held its breath. On one side, Napoleon's Franco-Spanish fleet, 66 warships, thousands of cannons, the combined might of two empires that had terrified Europe for a decade. On the other, the Royal Navy, 33 ships, one dying admiral who had already given one eye and one arm to England. The battle lasted 4 hours. Nelson died. Napoleon's naval dream died with him. But what if something else was already out there? Something that shouldn't exist in 1805, waiting silently beyond the horizon. To understand what happens next, you need to understand what Trafalgar actually was. This wasn't just a naval battle. It was the moment Britain locked its grip on the seas for the next 100 years. Napoleon had dreamed of invading England. To do that, he needed to control the English Channel. To control the Channel, he needed his fleet. After Trafalgar, he never had a fleet again. But here's what most people don't think about. The Battle of Trafalgar was fought entirely by feel, by sound, by smoke, by instinct. Once the cannons started firing, no admiral could see more than 30 meters through the black powder haze. Signals were impossible. Communication was chaos. Men aimed their cannons not at targets, but at the shapes they could barely make out through the fire. Now imagine something appears in that smoke that wasn't made in any shipyard. Something that makes no sound until it's directly overhead. Something that has been watching the entire battle from 30,000 feet, seeing everything. Tracked on screens the sailors of 1805 would have called witchcraft for the last 3 hours. The USS Gerald R. Ford arrives at 0600 while the fleets are still maneuvering. From the flight deck, which stretches longer than 3 city blocks, the battle below looks like a painting, a slow, beautiful, terrible painting. The ship's combat management system has already catalogued every vessel in both fleets. Names, tonnage, gun counts, trajectories. The Franco-Spanish fleet alone carries over 2,000 cannons. The Royal Navy carries 1,700. Together they are about to fire more metal in 4 hours than most countries produced in a year. But then something strange happened. The carrier doesn't fire. Not yet, it waits. Because the officers aboard are facing a question that no military training had ever prepared them for. Whose side are you on? England is an ally. France is a rival. Napoleon is technically not yet the enemy. And the year is 1805. The rules of this war have not been written yet. The carrier's helicopters go up first, not armed at observation runs. The rotor wash alone shreds the sails of 3 French frigates before their crews even understand what passed over them. Men who had never heard anything louder than a cannon shot pressed themselves to the deck, covering their ears, looking at the sky as if God himself had exhaled. By 1400, the battle is already turning against the Franco-Spanish fleet, exactly as history records. Villeneuve, the French commander, is cornered. His ships are being boarded, burned, surrendered one by one. Nelson has already been shot. He is below deck dying, asking if the battle is won, and then the FA-18s launch not to attack. Not yet. 2 fighters simply fly low over the fleet in a show of presence. A warning. They pass over the largest French ships at 300 meters, and the sonic concussion alone snaps 3 masts. Gunpowder, already unsettled by hours of firing, detonates in powder rooms below deck. 2 Spanish ships of the line sink within minutes, not from cannon fire, not from boarding, but from the sheer pressure of something flying faster than sound passing over their hull. This is where everything changed, because the surviving sailors on both sides stop firing. They stop not from orders. They stop because every human instinct they have is screaming at them to be very, very still. Civilization shock later. In the accounts that survive, French sailors describe the carrier as a floating island. An island that moved without wind. An island that hummed with a sound like 1,000 millstones. An island from which metal birds were born and then returned. One Spanish priest aboard the Santa Ana writes in his journal that night, in the wreckage of the battle, that he saw the devil's ship. He writes that it carried no sails because it needed no wind from God, that it made thunder without clouds, that it watched them the way a falcon watches mice, patient, unblinking, and utterly without mercy. Nelson below deck is told about the ship. His officers don't know how to describe it. They say only that there is something beyond the battle. Something large, something that is not fighting but watching. Nelson asks if it is on their side. His flag captain doesn't answer, because he genuinely doesn't know. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is what the carrier's crew is realizing in real time. They are watching 3,000 men die. They can stop it. One helicopter with a medical team could have saved Nelson. One transmission on the right frequency could have ended the battle in 10 minutes. They have the power to completely rewrite the history of the Western world, and they are paralyzed by the knowledge of what that rewriting would actually mean, because here is the truth that the carrier scenario forces us to confront. This was never about weapons. It was never about tonnage or aircraft or the gap between a smoothbore cannon and a guided missile. It was about the oldest question in the history of power. What do you do when you can do anything? Every civilization that has ever held overwhelming power over another has faced this moment. The Romans faced it in Carthage. The Spanish faced it in the Americas. The atomic powers faced it in 1945. The answer every time has been different, and every time the answer has told us more about the powerful than about the powerless. The men aboard the Gerald R. Ford were not monsters. They were not conquerors. They were simply people, with families, with fears, with a chain of command and a set of rules written for a world that no longer applied, staring down at a battle that had already been decided by history, wondering if they had the right to change it. And almost nobody talks about what happened next, because what happened next wasn't a battle. It was a choice, the most human choice imaginable, to act or not to act, to intervene or to watch, to believe that your power gives you the right to decide, or to understand for the first time that it doesn't. The ships of 1805 carried cannons. The carrier carried something far more dangerous, the absolute certainty that it could win, and the absolute uncertainty of whether winning was the point-ending final narration. Trafalgar ended, as it always does, in British victory. Nelson died at 4:30 in the afternoon, asking only that his country remember him. 20 ships of the Franco-Spanish fleet were captured or destroyed. Not one British ship was lost. In our version of events, the carrier watches the final hours from the horizon. Its fighters orbit silently above the smoke. Its cameras record everything. The burning ships, the floating dead, the men clinging to wreckage in water so cold it would kill them in minutes. And then, as the sun drops below the Atlantic and the last gun falls silent, the carrier turns. Its engines, each one more powerful than every ship in both fleets combined, begin to push it north. It leaves no wake that the sailors of 1805 could interpret. No message, no claim of victory or defeat, just the absence of the thing they could not explain. By morning, the surviving crews will argue about what they saw. Some will say it was a vision. Some will say it was a weapon. Some will say it was God testing them, and that they failed. None of them will be entirely wrong. The most frightening thing about absolute power is not what it does to the people who face it. It is what it does to the people who hold it. Because the moment you realize you can end any war you choose, you have to live with every war you didn't.